fairly purple patch there from my memory. On those events that they were having in Australia at that time around, the Aussie Open and the Masters and some of those state events, which were reasonably big back in those days.
I did well in the Australian Open. My first Australian Open was 93. I'd played 2 years on the Canadian Tour before I came down and qualified for the Australian Tour. I just kind of getting enough money under my belt playing the Canadian Tour before I came down. So 93 was my first year playing Australia. And right away, the Open was at Metropolitan, I think, in 93. And
John Morse, did he win 93?
Sorry?
Did John Morse?
I think Lee Westwood won that one.
Okay.
Lee Westwood won that one, I think. And so my memory of that, I played good solid 2 rounds, and I got paired with Ray Floyd in the 3rd round.
Oh, wow.
And so I'm on the first tee, and they're calling out the names, and Ray Floyd's first to hit, and they call winner of, the Masters and the PGA, and they're listing his major titles. And he stands up, and he hits a kind of a little toey hook into the left rough. And it wasn't that good of a shot. And that kind of relaxed me a little bit, seeing him hit a bad shot. And then they call me out, and it's just Paul Devenport from New Zealand, and that's it. And I get up there, and I am literally shaking. And it was just total muscle memory. I just swung, absolutely flushed it. Don't know how I did it, just straight down the middle, flush. And then I basically went most of the round just watching Ray Floyd play golf. And he missed, without a word of a lie, he missed the first 4 greens in regulation and was 1 under. He had chipped in, up and down everything else, just hitting these, how tightly mowing it is around the greens. Nice. He's just hitting these amazing shots up banks with sand wedge and nipping it just right. And so I'm watching this exhibition, and Steve Williams was on the bag, so that was cool. He was caddying for Ray at that time. And I remember distinctly a par 3 on the front, might have been 8. I don't know if 8's a par 3. Quite a decent size. Anyway, he stands up with 3-iron. I see him pull 3-iron, and the pin's just over the front bunker, and he hits the shot as high as you could hit a 7-iron, like just straight up in the air with a 3-iron, lands over the bunker. The greens are like rock, and it pulls up about 15 feet behind the hole. Incredible. And I get up there, and I go to 4-iron, and I just hit it as hard as I could with as much spin as I could, and it landed right where his 3-iron landed and rolled all the way to the back edge. And I was like, how did he do that? Like, incredible. But but little did I know, again, I got it to 7 under for the round through 14 holes, and then I realized I was actually playing really well. I was unconscious. I was in, I guess, the zone. I didn't even know what I was shooting, and I managed to hang on and shoot 66 that round, which was low round of the day, and that got me. I got paired with Peter Senior the final round, and again didn't play that great the final round. Finished maybe 12th or something in the tournament, but that day with Ray Floyd, I mean, it could have gone one way or the other. I could have shot 83, and I ended up shooting 66, and but that first time I'd really been in a zone like that where I didn't even know what I was doing, and that was a pretty cool day.
Was there another? It could be urban legend, Paul, but I have heard a story at the club, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here. Was there a time where your name was called out on the first tee, and your hand was shaking that bad you couldn't get the ball to stay on the tee, so you just had to drive it off?
Urban League. That was that day.
That was it.
With Ray Floyd, and that's Alan James' story that Steve Williams had told Alan James, and not true, because watching Ray hit his little toey hook in the left rough actually relaxed me. But I mean, don't get me wrong, I was super nervous. When I actually got over the ball to hit it, I was really nervous, but I got the ball on the tee okay. That wasn't an issue.
In 1996, you represented New Zealand. What was it like to pop on the Silver Fern and play for your country?
Yeah, that was a surprise for me. I found out in Prince Edward Island, which is way out East Coast Canada, in the Maritimes, like they call it over here. Anyway, I was at the tournament there, and I guess the Golf Association or PGA or whoever does it contacted the Canadian Tour, and they said that I was being asked to play for New Zealand in the World Cup. And I'm like, are you joking? There was Frank Noblo, Greg Turner, Grant Waite, Michael Campbell, and Phil Tatarangi. And maybe I was coming in at that stage in 96. I might have been right behind that, but there was certainly players that were from New Zealand that were better than me. But the way the schedules worked is a lot of those guys couldn't make it or were just worn out and didn't want to play. And so I ended up, me and Phil Tatarangi played in Cape Town, South Africa. I ended up having to miss the Australian Open because of it. It was scheduled at the same time. But representing the country, for me, that was huge. And the cooler thing with that is everybody got to meet Nelson Mandela at the function before the tournament. He was just basically shaking all the players' hands. I got to shake his hand and say hi, and that was basically it. And then he, saw him give a speech at the at that ceremony, but got to meet him in person, even if it was just brief. And then to experience the World Cup and play that was phenomenal. Just to say I've represented my country as an amateur and a professional. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, well done, Paul. So you're back up in Canada, and you had a few successes up there, or probably a couple more than a few successes. You won the Shell Open, is that correct?
So I won 4 official events on the Canadian Tour. I won 5 tournaments. One was unofficial, but it's not listed as a win. But so 4 official wins. One was here in Victoria. That was called the Shell Payless. They're both gas stations. Shell, obviously, petrol stations, and so I won that. My first win on the Canadian Tour was 1998, and I won the TELUS Open in Quebec. So basically the Quebec Open in 98. And then in 2000, I won in Edmonton. And then 2001, I won in Victoria and Quebec again. So 4 times here. And I won a tournament in Prince Edward Island, but that was the unofficial one. So it took a long time for me to get my first victory up here. And I seemed like I had better playing days in Australia. I think the Australian conditions suited my game more than the Canadian. Even though I won up here, obviously the competition's a little stronger in Australia than the Canadian Tour, but still pretty strong up here. And but it took a while for me to get that first victory.
Do you think the style, if you look at Paraparaumu Beach, obviously where you learnt your game, and the kind of shots that you have to play at Paraparaumu are similar to the shots you have to play largely on the sandbelt? And
yeah, I felt right at home playing those sandbelt courses. And the other one I loved was New South Wales in Sydney La Perouse. And it was that style of golf. It was windy, it was firm, and you had to play for the bounce, and you had to hit the shots, and that suited. And even in Perth too, because it got quite windy and firm out there. Being hot and dry, we're kind of in towards the desert out in Perth, and so I did well in the tournament out there a few times, and it took a while for me to play the game where it was like throwing darts, or you had to fly it past the hole and allow for the spin to bring it back. That just wasn't in my DNA, and that was hard for me to play that style of golf. I loved the wind, I loved the firm, and my putting stroke. I went for a while with it braced against my arm like this, kind of like a Matt Kuchar. Bernard Langer did that for a while. Then I went to the long putter, and that kind of style of putting suits a really fast green. And so when I got on slower greens or softer greens that were a little bit bumpy, there was no wrist in those strokes, and I didn't putt as well on that style. I actually struggled in the New Zealand Open at Paraparaumu for a long time when back then in the 90s, the greens were a little greener, I guess, and a little bumpier. And I putted the really fast, firm greens well and struggled on anything that was a little bumpy because of the style of putting. I didn't have any wrist, and I didn't suit those greens. So I felt at home on the sandbelts for sure.
Now, I got to play with you in 2014, I think it might have been, at our Pro-Am that we have.
13, I think.
And it was windy that day,
Oh,
very
yeah,
windy. And
yeah.
we got to the 14th hole, and you played this 4-iron into a 126 meter par 3 downhill with
Right.
with off the back foot with a little punch. I've never seen anything like it. You've told me that you will teach me it one day.
If I ever get back there again, yeah.
But you played
Yeah,
a
that's
style of shot that day that I haven't seen on a regular basis anyway.
right. It's basically the style of shot is very much like just a chip shot around the greens. So you stand considerably closer to the ball than you think. You have your hands, you choke down on the grip, and you have your hands higher in the air. So it kind of firms up the front wrist. And you don't really put the ball a long way back, kind of middle of the stance. You kind of open your stance up, and it's just like you're hitting a little chip and run, basically, but with a fuller swing. So you're taking 2, 3, sometimes 4 clubs extra, depending on the wind, of course. And you're basically hitting a punch fade is what you're doing. You're really holding on and firm with that front wrist, and you're hitting a punch fade. I don't really put it too far back. I just stand very close to the ball with my hands quite high. And I got that shot after watching a video of Lee Trevino doing an exhibition, and he was hitting shots, just standing there with a bunch of balls on a par 3, hitting shots at it, and he was hitting these 6 irons just in that style, and he was showing how to hit that punch shot. And of course, he's way open, and he was showing where he normally stood and where he stood for that shot, and it was like the ball was so close to his feet, and he was hitting these low punch. And what happens there is the ball fades and it lands very soft with quite a bit of spin. So when you're into the wind, you're not getting this kind of low hooky shot that lands and runs forever, and you've got no control over. So you could hit this kind of punch fade that was low, the wind didn't touch it, and it would land soft and stop quick. And I used that shot a lot in Australia. I'd play entire rounds of golf, especially in the afternoons in Perth when the wind was up. And in Melbourne, when it was windy, I'd play the entire round with my irons. If it was an 8-iron shot, I'd be pulling out 6-iron and hitting that shot. Right. And I just had a lot of control over it. The hard thing was when you went to another course to go back to your normal style of play again. But yeah, even with driver to some extent, not quite, but it was a great shot to play, but especially iron shots into the wind. And
it was quite interesting with the postponement of the Masters, watching some of the replays over the weekend and various years right through. I mean, I watched right into the early 80s through to Tiger's 2019 success. But it was quite interesting just to see the swing seemed a lot more fluid and a lot more individual than perhaps you see today with today's robots. Everything's very mechanical and almost very perfect. It was interesting to see.
Yeah, I watched a few of them. I watched Tiger's win last year. Just finished. I had on tape. Just finished watching that last night, actually. And I think I saw the 2005 when he chipped in against DeMarco. I think I saw 2004 and maybe 2001. I think are the ones I saw, the replays. I didn't really notice what you were seeing. I was just kind of watching. And
if you look at example for Arnold Palmer's putting stroke, I mean, he's so hunched over and his knees are all buckled in.
You're talking old days, right? You're talking the oldies.
Yeah. Well, that was 1980 was quite old for me, Paul. But,
you look at like a guy like Gary Player and Arnold Palmer. They had a very pop stroke, which, like I was saying earlier, the greens back then were slower and bumpier, and even Augusta was a lot slower than it is these days.
Yeah, you can see.
So that stroke was needed to get the ball. They had a little more loft on their putters back then too, and so they kind of popped it and got it rolling that way. A long putter like Bernard Langer uses would never work on those old greens like that. It would just start bouncing right away, and that's what I was making reference to earlier. But yeah, that was the style. That's how they had to play. The greens were slower and bumpier, and and the swings. I mean, a lot of people didn't have coaches back then, and just a lot of talent, and they just swung the way they swung. And you get them all from halfway down and through impact, and they're all pretty similar though in that area. It's just it's like Jim Furyk. It's how you get there, right?